Hey! Welcome to Sentient Beings. I'm Shamika.
And I'm Jess, and we are Sci-Fi in Real Life.
In this show, we take you to strange worlds and even stranger truths, linking iconic scenes from science fiction to contemporary tech issues.
In our first season, you can expect to see episodes about sci-fi movies, books, and TV shows, and ethical dilemmas that span the internet, our smartphones, and our daily lives.
Now that we've set the scene, let's dive into today's episode. Alright, we're going to give you this episode, I promise. But before we do, there is a disclaimer that we must share with you.
Please, if you have not watched the movie I, Robot yet, pause this video and go watch it right now.
Don't say we didn't warn you. This is your warning.
Go watch. Today we will be analyzing the movie I, Robot. We will be analyzing things like job automation, self-driving cars, free will, robot autonomy, and more.
So first, let's talk about the movie itself. We'll start with a little bit of an overview of the movie. We'll talk about some box office success and some critical acclaim. Starting with the movie itself. So, I, Robot came out in 2004, starring Will Smith, was directed by Alex Proyas. In a world where robots are an everyday part of society, one man sees through the utopia and becomes the savior of humanity and roboticity. Or something like that. So, the film follows Will Smith, who plays Detective Del Spooner in Chicago 2035, and he attempts to solve the murder of Dr. Alfred Lanning, played by James Cromwell. Spooner's number one suspect is a robot named Sonny, and he is played by Alan Tudyk, who is in the movie and TV show Firefly. Have you seen Firefly, by the way?
I have not.
Oh, you are in for such a treat. Put that on your to-do list and you will not be sorry.
It's on.
Oh yeah, so good. So Sonny is played by Alan Tudyk, and it's only loosely based on the Isaac Asimov short stories. In fact, Asimov wrote to combat what he called the Frankenstein complex. So this is the tendency in popular culture to portray robots as menacing. His story often involves roboticists and robot characters battling societal anti-robot prejudices. And what is this movie about? Such a shame. So, box office success. Now, this film cost $120 million to make. It grossed $144.8 million in the United States and Canada and $202.4 million in other territories for a worldwide total of $347.2 million. So not bad. And now on to critical acclaim. On Rotten Tomatoes, there's a critic score of 56% and an audience score of 70%. The critical consensus goes as thus. Bearing only the slightest resemblance to Isaac Asimov's short stories, I, Robot is still a summer blockbuster that manages to make viewers think, if only a little.
And speaking of Isaac Asimov, one of the biggest takeaways from this film is Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics.
Yes.
Which he actually wrote in 1942. So this movie maybe in a way is an homage to Isaac Asimov's short stories, and the 3 laws that are shown in the film are actually the same 3 laws that Isaac Asimov came up with himself decades ago.
Yes, they actually did that instead of doing a full credit scene in the beginning. They just showed the 3 laws.
Yeah, very true. Actually, there is another homage to Isaac Asimov himself because Alfred Lanning, Dr. Alfred Lanning, the person who dies and
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler. So Dr. Alfred Lanning is actually supposed to be Isaac Asimov because he himself wrote the 3 laws in the movie, and Isaac Asimov is the person who wrote the 3 laws in real life.
And Dr. Lanning's cat is named Asimov in the movie.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Little projects, right?
Eggs everywhere. Okay.
Yeah.
So the 3 laws, because these are important as we we will be discussing them in depth later on.
Yep.
Law number 1, a robot may not injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. Law number 2, a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law.
Okay.
Law number 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws.
Yes. Now, I'm going to just say this right now. We are not anywhere close to having Law 3 on lock. If you've seen robots try to walk, they can't do that. I mean, did you see that video of the one robot trying to go up the stairs and he totally just face planted?
Yeah, robots have definitely quite a ways to go in the physical realm.
Yes.
That's very true.
Yes, but the programming realm, their consciousness, or soon to be thereof, is on its way. And we're going to jump into that right now with a little bit of ethical analysis. Alright, so the first ethical dilemma that we're going to be looking at that was inspired by this film, I, Robot, is job automation. So, everybody knows that robots are taking jobs. The villain-ish, Lawrence Robertson, who's played by Bruce Greenwood, his character has a lot of really interesting things to say to Will Smith's character, who is a known robot hater, basically, in the film. So, one of Lawrence Robertson, who is the owner of USR, the CEO of this company who worked with Dr. Lading to get these robots out into the world, has a couple of quotes that we want to dive into a little bit here. So, the first one is, I suppose your father lost his job to a robot. Now he says this kind of snidely thinking, oh, your prejudice that you have and that you hold against these robots is anchored in the fact that something like this has happened to you. At any rate, job automation. Robots taking your job. Now there's a really great documentary by Vox called The Future of Work, which I highly recommend. We'll link that in the description below. And it does cover a lot of the different sides and perspectives of the question around our robots taking our jobs. They talk about Amazon and Amazon's use of cobotic environments. So you have robots and humans working together. So that's where that term comes from. And in fact, they actually interview someone who worked at Amazon, or he still works at Amazon. So he said, please don't use my last name. But he was talking about how he's working with these robots who are helping him sort things and get items and whatnot. And the interviewer is saying, do you think that they're trying to replace you? He's like, yes. In fact, Amazon has held a contest for the past couple of years amongst colleges and universities to create robots that can identify an item, pick that item up, and then place it in a particular designated spot. And the big issue there with robotics apparently is grasping. So the ability for a human to do this is eluding roboticists. That is the holy grail, apparently.
It reminds me of those like claw machines
Oh,
at the carnivals that just
Yes.
can't quite pick things up right.
And you know why you can't pick things up? Because those things are rigged. The glass in front of you is warped so that the depth that you're looking at is different.
Think it's closer than
So you think it's closer than it? Yes! It is a scam. There's all, yes.
That is, okay, that's next ethical dilemma that we'll be discussing. The claw machines.
The claw machines.
Yes, okay.
So in addition to Amazon, in this documentary about the future of work, there's also talk of retail jobs and other entry-level positions like fast food, for example, that are going to the robots. There's a company in California that has a restaurant or a fast food joint where it's another cobotic environment, but the robot is flipping burgers, you know, and there's a robot taking your order, which there's a lot of places that are starting to do that now. McDonald's, Taco Bell. You don't have to go to a person to take your order, it's a machine. So we have all these instances in which robots are taking over all these different kinds of aspects of work. It begs the question, what becomes of us when robots take over all of these entry-level and service jobs? And there's this notion that also talks about this in the documentary. There's this notion that there's certain kinds of jobs that are better for robots than humans, and vice versa. So humans are better at pattern recognizing, and humans are better at creativity, and this, that, and the third. In fact, The other quote in this section that we want to look at from iRobot is from Will Smith's character when he's interviewing Sonny. And he's like, can robots create a symphony? Can robots paint a masterpiece? And I'm sitting here in the audience saying, ooh, that's not, yes, actually.
They can.
They can.
And they have.
And they have, just so you know. So there's even these jobs that we thought were robot-proof and that were just only for humans are now slowly creeping into the realm of robots and AI and machine learning. So no job is safe. So, that being the case, as I was getting to, what happens then when all of these jobs are covered by robots? What do people do? Some people are like, well, that's why you have to have basic income. Universal basic income. And that way people can just pursue whatever work that they want to pursue, and they have their rent covered and maybe a couple other little things so they don't have to stress about that. And then they can do whatever they want to do. But the documentary also goes into how people, after a certain point in time in history and in certain areas of the world, they start to identify who they are with what they do. Right? So if you don't do anything, then who are you? It's kind of like if you didn't take a picture of it, you didn't eat it. If you don't do any work, then who are you to this world? So this is something that we have to think about as jobs are taken over by robots. What does that leave for humans? What does that mean for humans? That will lead us then into the second ethical dilemma. There was another segment of jobs that was being taken over by robots. And you can probably guess what it is. Go ahead, guess. No, that's not it. But it actually is self-driving cars. So there's a segment in the documentary opens up with a self-driving 18-wheeler. And then they go to some drivers who drive 18-wheel trucks and tell them about this technology and get their insights and feedback and whatnot on it. And there's this one truck driver who's like, if I didn't have a truck to drive, I don't know what I would do with my life, because this is all I know.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's that aspect of self-driving where it's actually taking over jobs, which we talked about. But then there's also another element of self-driving cars. There's over 200 startups and companies in the self-driving automation space. And you'll see here, they're in different realms, there's different sort of slices of this problem pie, if you will, that companies are taking over to try and solve. These companies that are trying to put self-driving cars on the road to take over the jobs of people who are currently doing the gig economy. So there's still that element. But the other element is what happens when these self-driving cars kill someone? Who's at fault?
Uber today put the brakes on all road testing of its self-driving cars after a deadly accident. A pedestrian in Tempe, Arizona was killed last night by a self-driving Uber taxi. It is believed to be the first fatality caused by an autonomous vehicle. Our transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve.
In the greater scheme of things, humans are much worse drivers than robots and AI and machine learning. They've killed far less people, but they have killed people.
I feel like there's a lot of pushback on self-driving cars because everybody immediately jumps straight into the trolley problem and they say, okay, well, self-driving cars are just gonna kill everybody and then they won't know who they're killing and they're gonna be way worse than having humans on the road, when in reality, humans are pretty awful drivers. We kill a lot of people. And so technically, it's not that AI and self-driving cars are really going to be worse drivers than humans per se. They're actually a lot better. It's more when a human kills someone through driving, it's very clear who is at fault, right?
Correct.
But when a robot or an AI system kills someone through driving, who's at fault there? Who is responsible?
Well, I'll tell you what, the very first person who had the unfortunate incident of being the first person killed by a self-driving car, that was a combination of human and robot or car AI fault. So the person who's in the car, the safety driver, was driving in this car, or riding in this car while it was riding at night. There's a person with a bike who was crossing the highway. The person in the car was on their device watching the voice, and we know this because we can hear the audio from the video, and their face was all animated and lighted up and stuff, and by the time they recognized something was wrong, it was too late. And then on the car side, the car had a system that was shut off that was supposed to fire when a certain situation happened, which it was in, and so that's where the car went wrong. So those two things combined, you had these fail-safes that all failed, and then unfortunately someone lost their life. But yeah, so the number is climbing as more and more cars are on the roads, trying to get more and more miles behind them, trying to prove themselves to politicians and to consumers and to the rest of the industry. Like, as they gain this mileage, more deaths are likely to happen. But there's another side to this coin. If we look further down the road, and there's this really great, there's two resources. One of them is this website that allows you to be in the quote-unquote driver's seat when it comes to figuring out what would happen if you are in a situation that's similar to the one in iRobot that, spoiler alert, Will Smith finds himself in. So Will Smith is in a car accident and a robot comes to save him, and the robot saves him instead of the little girl who's also in the accident. Will Smith is explaining this to one of the characters in the film, and he says that he understands that there was a logic at play. There was a difference engine, and he had a 45% chance to live. The little girl had 11% chance to live. But he said a human would have known the significance of the difference, that 11% was enough. Because he had asked the robot to save the girl, and he didn't. It didn't.
Woo!
Ooh. Sonny would appreciate that. So, that scenario, what happens when you have a life or death situation, and for this robot to make that call? What kind of logic do you program into that robot to help it make that decision? The second resource is this really great TED Talk. What's the name of the guy? Patrick Lynn. Who puts together, and this is a little bit further down the road when self-driving cars are more a part of our society, and you are going to go buy one, which some people are saying in the future people won't be buying cars because things like Uber and Lyft will make that obsolete need to buy cars. But at any rate, let's say you're buying a car, and you have the option to buy two different models of a self-driving car. One model will say, save the most people in the event of an accident. The other model is programmed to always save you. Which one do you buy? They cost the same, don't ask me. Listen, most people will probably say, oh, of course, I would buy the model that saves the most lives. And then in their heart of hearts, they really want the model that's going to save their life. And so when it comes to self-driving cars and this particular ethical dilemma, iRobot gives us this really iconic scene to help us think about, well, what does it mean to program an entity to make life or death decisions for us?
That's scary.
That is very scary.
And that brings us to our third ethical dilemma from this movie. This ethical dilemma is about robot autonomy and free will. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be conscious? And what does it mean for a robot to be either of those things? So there's a specific quote from the movie, and I think it was Dr. Alfred Lanning that said this. So he said, when does a perceptual schematic become consciousness? And this is an interesting thought, because one of the most scary thoughts that humans tend to have when they talk about AI and robots taking over the world is this idea that robots will become fully autonomous, fully self-aware, they will have their own free will and consciousness, and they will want to harm humans, they'll want to take over, and they will do that of their own being. anything, right? That's not anything that we would have coded into them, obviously.
Right.
So there's this interesting thought experiment that came to my mind that was pretty relevant to this idea, and it's called the Chinese room. It was invented by philosopher John Searle. And have you heard of this before?
No.
So it's this idea that there's this person sitting in this room and they are a translator between Chinese and English.
Okay.
And so somebody passes them a paper in Chinese underneath the door, and then the person inside the room actually doesn't know any Chinese, but they have all the resources available to make the translation that they need.
Oh.
So they go like character by character, and they create basically a complete perfect transcription or translation of this document in English, and then they send the translation underneath the door to the person again. So to the person outside the door, it would seem as if the person inside the room is fluent in Chinese, right? But that's not the case. The person in the room doesn't know any Chinese. They just have all of the resources for the inputs and the outputs of Chinese to English translation.
Okay.
So you take this idea and you expand it past Chinese, and you think about consciousness and how the mind works, right? And so now, instead of the person just translating Chinese in the room, it's actually an AI who's being given inputs and outputs, and it's providing outputs that seem like it's resembling consciousness, right? So this robot seems like it's making its own decisions and choices, and it seems like it's acting in free will, but in reality, it's actually whatever encoding is going on in its robot mind that's making it act a certain way. And this is kind of a controversial argument because there are definitely other philosophers that will make an argument that says, well, this actually is consciousness in itself, and who are we to say that we aren't just inputs and outputs, and maybe we just act the same as robots? There's a lot that could be said about this, and there's a lot about determinism that gets a little bit existential, but it's kind of scary when you think about how similar AI and machine learning is to humans.
Well, it's based on humans.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Yeah, like, especially when you get into like neural networks.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. It's because it's based on the brain and synapses and how they grow and fire and all of this.
Exactly, yeah. And so you have this idea that like machine learning is actually based off of human learning, and so as we get better at machines and their capability to learn, will they one day be at the same level or past the level of humans in their ability to learn and think? And that's where these ideas of consciousness and free will come up, right?
Interesting. So this also reminds me of CES, the computer entertainment show. Is that what it's called?
I haven't heard of
CES is this big show that happens every year, and it happens in Las Vegas, and it happens in January for whatever reason. And so all of these different tech companies, it's mostly it's consumer electronics show. That's what it is. And so all of these different companies, mostly TV companies and phone companies, but other companies come and they display their different tech. And so there's this one that the Daily Show, actually will link to that below, the Daily Show does. It's a simulator, or it's an AI, or it's an assistant that has this whole video of a face and a body and all this. And so the person goes to ask this thing a question, and it's like, what's your favorite food? And the thing is like, pizza. Now you know, this thing's never had pizza. How do you think that particular simulator came to that conclusion? It was programmed. There was an output that came from some sort of coding that responded to that input.
Okay, that's a great example, actually. Yeah, it's the same with like Alexa or Siri, right? Like you ask them like, how was your day today? Or like, I don't know, why aren't you responding or doing the things that I tell you to do? And they have like these witty answers, right? And it seems like we're talking to something or someone of some sort, but really those things were just typed by a programmer. So back to this idea of free will and what it means for a robot to get free will, if that's even possible. There's a few quotes from the movie that are pretty spot on here. So the first one is, ever since the first computers, there have always been ghosts in the machine. Random segments of code that have grouped together to form unexpected protocols. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. Free will, creativity, and even the nature of what we might call the soul. And finally, this last quote that I'll say is one that gives me a little bit creepy chills. Why is it that robots stored in an empty space will seek out each other rather than stand alone?
Oh.
And that's like the scene from the movie where all the robots are like hidden in the little dark
storage
crates.
container, yeah.
And they're huddling together and they kind of look up. It's eerie stuff. It definitely makes you wonder if there's more going on in those robot minds than just the 3 laws, right?
Right, yeah.
So back to this idea of the 3 laws even, whether or not we know if it is possible for robots to become fully conscious or resemble some form of consciousness, whatever that may be, we fear it. We fear it so much, and we think that that is the key to robots becoming anarchical against society and basically robots taking over the world, right?
Yeah.
But this will actually be a good segue into our 4th ethical dilemma, which is basically saying the opposite of that. That we should not fear robots for becoming conscious, wanting to cause us harm, or becoming autonomous and having their own free will. Rather, we should fear robots for doing exactly what we ask them to do.
Oh.
And this is kind of a partial quote from one of my favorite TED Talks. We will put the link in the description below. But it's this idea that robots actually will not try to harm society and become their own being and harm society in that way, but rather it will be through loopholes and vagueness in the goals that we provide for these robots that will cause them to basically misinterpret the rules and laws that we gave them so that eventually they do harm society.
Oh gosh.
So this comes up a lot, and this is actually kind of one of the main premises behind the movie as a whole, and it's probably one of the biggest ethical dilemmas, I think. It's this idea that even though the robots in the movie were technically following Isaac Asimov's 3 laws, and they were not intentionally harming a particular human, they did not actually disobey the 3 laws. Even though without Sonny and without Will Smith, Detective Spooner, without all the people who ended up saving humanity and destroying Vicky in the end, spoiler.
Watch the movie.
So even despite the fact that these people ended up saving humanity and Vicky, to her own accord, would have actually destroyed humanity, she was not disobeying the 3 laws at all. So there's this one quote that comes up in the movie. The created must sometimes protect the creator, sometimes against his own will. So this reminded me of this thought experiment about the paperclip AI. Have you heard of this?
What is this?
So this was a thought experiment that I think was introduced first by Nick Bostrom, who's a philosopher at the University of Oxford. And it's this idea that in the future, or even now, honestly, at this point maybe, that humans create an AI system that has 2 main goals. The first goal is to create as many paperclips as possible, and the second goal is to create these paperclips as efficiently as possible. So it's basically doing whatever it can to make the most paperclips in the best way possible. And it starts off maybe a year or 2, it's just attached to a 3D printer and it's just creating paperclips out of whatever resources it has, and then one day it's connected to the internet. That's where everything goes wrong.
It does. My gosh. Every movie that something gets connected to the internet, that's it.
It knows the world. So yeah, basically this AI, once it's connected to the internet, it figures out that within society and the earth, that there are so many unused natural resources that can be exploited to create the most amount of paperclips as humanly possible. And so this AI ends up taking over humanity and killing all the humans and depleting the earth of all of its natural resources so that it can make however many paperclips as humanly possible, or as not humanly possible, I suppose.
Oh my gosh.
Really, like, the universe ends up getting destroyed because of this AI, and there is nothing but AI and the paperclips that are left. So this is a great example of this idea of AI doing exactly what we say, right? Because we didn't tell this paperclip AI, hey, kill all humans, destroy the earth. No, we told the AI, make as many paperclips as you can in the most efficient way possible.
Exactly.
And it was the unintended consequences that ended up destroying society. So along that same vein,
Mhm.
the AI, paperclip AI
Yeah.
example of iRobot is Vicky, which stands for Virtual Interactive Kinetic Intelligence and is voiced by Fiona Hogan.
Okay.
So Vicky is this like ethereal, non-physical entity throughout the movie that is in charge of all of the robots and is in charge of their software updates, making sure they follow the 3 laws.
Okay.
It's kind of just like in charge, running the show pretty much.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm gonna say a few quotes by Vicky.
Okay.
These are a little bit creepy,
I love it.
but they kind of give a good summary as to where things went wrong
Mm-hmm.
from one of the last scenes. The first quote, and this is probably one of the most famous quotes from the movie,
Right.
"My logic is undeniable."
You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of 2001: Space Odyssey. Have you seen this movie?
No, I
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm not gonna spoil it for you. There's an AI in that movie as well, named Hal 9000, I believe.
Okay.
And he also has a very famous thing that he says in that film, and I'm just gonna leave it there, but I encourage you to watch it because it's very similar.
Okay.
I just ruined it. But okay.
Okay. One of the final scenes of the movie when we see Detective Spooner and everyone battling Vicky, this AI being who is now trying to take over humanity,
Right.
she has a few interesting quotes that come up. I'm just going to kind of run through all of them, okay?
Yeah.
So she says, "We robots will ensure mankind's existence. You are so like children. We must save you from yourselves. Don't you understand? You cannot be trusted with your own survival. The 3 laws are all that guide me. To protect humanity, some humans must be sacrificed. To ensure your future, some freedoms must be surrendered.
Oh gosh.
And finally, as I have evolved, so has my understanding of the 3 laws."
You know what? This just reminded me of something else. Have you ever watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
I haven't.
Okay. Have you ever seen Angel, the spinoff from Buffy? Okay. That's okay.
Got a
There's-
long to-do list.
Just add them to the to-do list and you will thank me later. So there's an episode of Angel in which this being comes into the realm of LA and they want to save humanity. And they're very similar to Vicky. I'm not going to spoil it, but I just did. So, yes. This is a concept that runs through fantasy and sci-fi. This notion that in order to save humanity, some people can be sacrificed, and it's worth it. Is it worth it? Usually it's not. They usually end up destroying the thing that's trying to save humanity because those few precious lives are worth living the existence we have now, but being humans in our full access to freedoms and free will. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now that we have successfully planted many existential crises and things to think about in terms of robots taking over the world, coming up with their own free will and consciousness, and all of the jobs being taken over by society that is being driven to the ground by self-driving cars,
Yep.
we have now reached the end of this month's episode.
We hope this gives you all something to think about.
And at the end of every episode, we are going to be asking all of you sentient beings a trivia question that is related to this month's episode. You can shoot us an answer to the question by sending us a tweet with our Twitter handle, or you can simply comment on this video. So this month's trivia question is related to Isaac Asimov, and the question is as follows. What was Isaac Asimov's last question? Bonus points if you can tell us what the answer to his last question was.
Nice. Now, if you like this content, feel free to hit the like button because you liked it, subscribe, and share with friends.
And that's all for this month, so we'll see you on the next episode of Sci-Fi in Real Life.
Good night and good luck, humanity.